everybody, Bob Chick along with David Bay. We are here in Chi-Town. It is 4th of July weekend, David. Of course, Tim Gardner putting on the NPC Tim Gardner Extravaganza, and of course the Chicago Pro. Every class represented here in Chicago. Over 130 pros here on hand this weekend.
Yeah, no, Tim shows are always some of the best that we see throughout the country, year in and year out. And one of the handful of shows that do have every division here. I don't think there's men's wheelchair bodybuilding, but other than that, every division that they have to offer on both the men and women's side. So it should be a good show. A lot of competitors, as always. You know, Tim runs everything first class, so the competitors show out in pretty big numbers. So looking forward to another good weekend here. It's my fourth year, so
yeah, it's going to be a good one, a blockbuster event. Once again, congratulations to Tim Gardner and of course his production staff. It's going to be a big one here. Luke Tesvich, the head judge, in attendance, and he's done this, I think, the last few years as well. Every class representing, sending somebody to the Olympia, with the exception, of course, women's bodybuilding, that qualifying, of course, for the Wings of Strength Rising Phoenix Championships, that, of course, in Phoenix, Arizona this year. But, Dave, we're going to get right to it. We've got lots of classes, of course. The women's represented fully. Bikini, figure, fitness is loaded up, by the way. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Women's bodybuilding, of course, and the men's divisions, 212, bodybuilding, classic physique, and the men's physique as well. So we've got a whole bunch to talk about here. We'll start with the women just briefly, of course. Not a lot of big superstar names in here, so it's a wide open field. Women's physique, two notables, Jamie Pinder and Mindy O'Brien, probably going to be going heads up on this one. Both of them excellent women's physique competitors, and both of them, of course, looking to get that Olympia spot.
Yeah, no, the neat thing about some of these shows when you don't have the big names is that it really creates a good opportunity for people who are either new to the scene or have made good improvements over the last couple of years to really get their face out there and, get into that top 5 spot. We're so used to looking at these lineups at some of the bigger shows, the New York show, the Toronto show, and being able to pick early favorites. And there are some names that jump out. In fitness, we have the names that you mentioned, the bikini, Lacey DeLuca and Yurishna Ayala jump out to me. Women's physique, you have Jamie Pinder, your champion from a couple of years ago. So there are some favorites in some of the classes, but for the
two-time defending champ in fitness that you mentioned it, David, Fiona Harris from Canada. I tell you what, I wouldn't bet against her. I think she's going to make it 3 in a row here and punch that ticket back to the Olympia. But some great names in there. Nicole Duncan, my old friend, in the competition, so she's still kicking around. And I tell you what, she's always bringing a high-flying routine into the fitness. But I'm excited with fitness. It's one of my favorite events for these competitions. It's really the only thing that has any excitement in terms of athletic ability. So hats off to the girls. They'll be bringing it tomorrow, of course, on the pro stage. But let's get into the men. The 212 class is loaded up, David. It's a good class. There's some good names in there. And my good friend Mark Dugdale back in the mix on that one there. But give me some of the other names that are going to be some of the favorites looking in the prejudging tomorrow.
Well, you bring up a good point. This is a big 212 show. And from the lineups that we've seen, I think it's probably the biggest that we've had so far this year. So deep in numbers. The name that jumps off the list as an early favorite from here is Dobromir Delev. So we were just talking about him earlier. When you see pictures of this guy, he looks absolutely massive. His conditioning is nuts. I saw him in person and it shocked me a little bit because he's a lot smaller when you see him in person than he looks on stage. But as we all know, how you look on stage is what really counts, and he looks fantastic. He was one of the few guys who was actually very close to making weight. So he actually did kick off his shoes and his sweatpants when he had to weigh in. His legs were crazy vascular, so unless there's some serious disproportions as far as his conditioning for body parts, I'm looking for him to be one of the favorites. Mark Dugdale coming off a win in Anchorage, Alaska not too long ago.
Tricky Jackson back in the mix.
Tricky Jackson, he's won here before. I mean, there's some good names. Brad Davis, one of the biggest guys in a 212 class, usually has a hard time nailing his conditioning. We've seen Brad walking around. He looks significantly leaner than I've seen him before. So if he's on the money, he could do well. I mean, there's
the people's champ is in the mix. John Meadows. I tell you what, man, you know what? John is such a nice guy. He's so well received by the fans that you can't help but root him on. He's not going to be the most aesthetically pleasing, never is, doesn't claim to be. But I tell you what, he's going to bring that freaky conditioning, and that gets rewarded sometimes.
Yeah, and he's a big guy too. He's not put together, mass wise, maybe like a Jose Raymond or a Flex Lewis or an Eduardo Correa. But he's still, he's one of these guys that's barely making 212. So there's a lot of muscle. His conditioning is going to be crazy. It'll be nice to see how he compares to some of these other guys. There's a lot of guys guys weighing in like 180, 190, and granted there's no scale on stage, but when you have somebody on a shorter frame outweighing somebody by 20, 25 pounds, unless you're a Marvin Ward or a Sean Clarita, it's hard to give up that much weight. So John,
look for a Wendell Floyd. I want to bring up his name because he had a breakout show. I believe it was at one of the Europas last time we saw him on stage, if I'm not mistaken. But the kid's got a good physique, and he's one of those guys who you don't quite notice at first, but I tell you what, he starts getting those call-outs and starts hitting poses, and that physique comes alive. So look for Wendell Floyd to possibly put himself into that top 3 mix. And this guy right here, Fernando de Almeida.
not familiar.
I tell you what, keep your eye on this guy. He's got a lot of muscle.
Yeah, I've never even seen his name before. Actually, somebody had mentioned a little bit earlier in the restaurant that there was a guy here from Brazil. I'm not familiar with him, but I mean, this show is going to be really good. We're bringing up some of the big names that guys might be favorites, but we also have some guys like we have Milton Martinez, Walter Martin, a very popular guy on the forums and everywhere. Shelby Starnes, Pete Ciccone. I mean, there's Raul Carrasco. I mean, this is a deep 212 lineup. I mean, other than the Arnold Classic where, we saw the best guys in the world, this is not only the biggest but also the deepest 212 lineup that we've seen, and it's going to be a really good show.
All right, give me the first call out, David, on that 212. It's going to be a tough one, but Luke Tesvich is going to give these guys a shot. He's going to run them through the mill. We're not doing individuals tomorrow for the competitors. That means that they're going to go right to lineups and comparisons. Personally, I like this. This is something that we've been kind of playing with this year on some of the bigger shows, and this definitely qualifies. But it's a lot of time out there, David, for individuals. And as everybody knows in the world of bodybuilding, individuals don't mean squat when you're out there. Everybody looks great alone. It's all in comparisons. But so far, it's been very well received by the athletes. And what I like most about it is they get more time to be compared to each other, and that's what the sport of bodybuilding is all about.
Yeah, there was some people not real happy with the way things went at the New York show, but I think what people missed is that traditionally at the older national level shows, some of you guys, you old school guys, BMC will remember that they used to come out and do quarter turns. Right. And it was chopped down from quarter turns. Now, that's not what they're doing at the show. They're bringing them out in the groups, and they're going through full sets of mandatories. Right. So it's not like they're just getting out quarter turns, and then they're walking off, and these guys aren't getting their stage time. Everybody's going through a full set of mandatories. The judges are picking their first call-out from those, right, as opposed to just free posing where they're standing next to themselves. So these guys are going to get a lot of time on stage. They're going to get a lot of good looks. And,
And honestly, I'd rather see more time for comparisons. I mean, listen, individuals, when you got this amount of numbers, you're talking hours. You're not talking a half hour, 40 minutes. You're talking literally show this size up to 2.5 hours of just individuals, which mean nothing to the judging, right, panel. They're sitting there tapping a pencil and waiting for you to get done because they want to get to the comparison. So, to me, it's a great move, especially for the bigger shows. Smaller shows, listen, you got the time. Absolutely. Let people do individuals. Everybody will pose at night and get their individual time, obviously, for the finals. But you mentioned New York, David, and then we'd be remiss, David. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention Big Steve Weinberger. Of course, this same weekend, big show in Teaneck, New Jersey. Of course, that's the Team Universe, now just called The Universe. But that's going to be a big show out there. So we got the other half of the team is out there. Everybody's covering, obviously, shows all over the place. And John Lindsay also with his show out in Vegas, I believe it is, this weekend. So you've got a lot of pros in a lot of different areas and some hopeful new pros coming out of New York. Speaking of pros, give me the big boys here. Another decent lineup, I got to be honest. You got some names in here. We got some talent pool and Tricky Jackson. You also got Freddie Smalls. So I'm expecting these guys to light up that stage as always. You got some veterans and Johnny Jackson that are going to be out there, and you got the new boy, Big Country himself, Dallas McCarver.
Yeah, I tell you what, I'm looking at this lineup, and I'm excited about this show. Again, it's one of the deeper lineups that we've seen so far this year. There's not necessarily a set first call out or a set second call out. It's really a matter of who brings it. We have 14 guys. Dallas McCarver, with the way he's been looking in his progress pictures, he's got to be your favorite. And there was not one person at the athletes meeting today who wasn't talking about Dallas's calves. Dallas was pretty much covered up, and he has these shorts on, and his calves, they're like Matarazzo, Pekulski, just obnoxiously huge, veiny calves. And granted, that doesn't mean everything else is.
He's a big boy, man. And that's why we call him Big Country. Because let me tell you something. He's a big country, strong kid. You've seen some of these videos, David.
Oh yeah.
And I don't mind saying this. So listen, I've seen a lot of guys come and go in this business in terms of strength in the gym and their training poundages and things like that. I got to be honest. Dallas McCarver is probably the strongest bodybuilder I've seen in the movements. I'm not talking just deadlifting and I'm talking just bodybuilding movements since Ronnie Coleman.
Yeah, he was. He was posting videos. Obviously, the deadlifting, but he was deadlifting over 800 pounds, and he did that for a couple reps. Probably the only guy to match his strength in the IFBB, a guy that's also here this weekend, Akeem Williams. And Akeem's going to be a question mark. One of these guys who carries as much mass as almost anybody you're going to see. He's got a little bit of a different physique in that some of his shots, he's got body parts that are lean and others that aren't. I know in his side shots, his hamstrings hang down deep, his glutes look striated. He turns around and hits his back shots. Traditionally, his upper back and his lats and stuff have been softer. So if he really dials it in, he can do really good. But there's some big guys here. Eddie Bracamontes, turned pro last year at Nationals, and he's one of the names that might get or fly under the radar a little bit. But he's a big guy
and very complete. We all were at the show last year with him and Sergio. Literally down to the wire. I mean, and literally, you talk about shows that could go either way. That literally could have gone either way. Very close. That was decided at night, as I know the judges were still scoring those guys. Sergio Naring, Eddie for the win. And again, I didn't have any issue with that. It didn't seem like Eddie did either. I mean, he knew it was a tough fight, and those guys seem to be good friends. But he's here, and he's got a very complete physique. I like Eddie to be up in that top first call out.
Yeah, and if we look at some of the other guys, you want to talk about big guys. Paulo Almeida's here. Brandon Curry, obviously aesthetically, probably going to be the best guy in the show. Conditioning is always a question mark. Timmy Gallard. Timmy, traditionally not somebody who brings really good conditioning to a show. Last year at Gary Udit's Masters Pro show, Timmy came out in like the best conditioning of his life, and aesthetically, he's right up there with some of the best guys in the industry. And if he can look really sharp, he might be a dark horse. This Sasan Hirati guy from the UK, I'm not really familiar with him. A lot of guys on the boards have been saying he's going to be a dark horse. Got Andrew Hudson, huge guy from South Africa. One of those guys where you look at him standing by himself and you're like, okay, he's big. You see him next to the guys on stage. He's got such a big frame. Ken Jackson, Rafael Jaramillo. When Rafael's on, he's on conditioning-wise. Michael Lockett, Fred Smalls, Masters Pros, Zdenek, Voprada. This is a really good lineup.
Michael Lockett, we saw obviously at the athletes check-in. I mean, this kid just walks around at 2% body fat. He's got more muscle on that frame than pretty much anybody, other than Paulo Almeida. Is this a breakout show for him? Is this a show that we need to see him kind of step it up? Because he's got all the muscle in the world, but he hasn't really refined it down into that physique that you need to get into that top three yet.
Yeah, Paulo's getting better and better and better. It took him a little while to turn pro on the Canadian scene. He hasn't really been training for that long, relatively. I want to say it's only like 4 or 5 years. So the amount of muscle that he's put on is pretty impressive. But he's getting a little bit sharper every time. I think he did Body Power and then New York, and so he's getting a little bit better. But he could still use some back thickness, so I'm not going to say he's one of these guys who has a really complete physique and just needs to dial it in. He does have some improvements that he needs to make, but he's close, and if he can make some small improvements and nail his conditioning, he's one of these guys that can be top 5 at a lot of shows.
Well, you got some veterans in there, Johnny Jackson as well, as we mentioned. Now Johnny seemed a little down in size to me. Now it could just be that he had a big giant shirt on, but he tends to fool you. But it almost seems like he's a little bit leaner than normal. Now that could not be a bad thing, because Johnny does seem to, when he goes in big, it seems to highlight the parts that aren't as good. Most notably for Johnny, obviously, his lower half, the lower legs. The thighs are still holding size. But I almost think it might not be a bad strategy move if he comes in just a little bit leaner. I'm talking 4 or 5 pounds. And that could put Johnny in a position to win this show. Let's face it, he's managed to get to the Olympia 8 or 9 or 10 times now, so he knows how to get it done.
Yeah, he's another one of these guys that's got to be shredded. We all know there's some discrepancy between his upper body and his lower body. His upper body, his chest, his traps, his back, some of the best in the whole industry. His legs aren't as massive as he needs to be, but when he's in really good shape, like he was in San Antonio last year, he came out, beat Steve Kuklo, and everybody had Steve, winning that show hands down. But Johnny needs to be in really good shape, and when he's in really good shape, his quads get feathered, they get very detailed. So even though there's not the fullness that some of the other guys have, he can do very well. Now he's going to be standing next to guys like McCarver and Akeem Williams, who have huge quads. Right. But if Johnny's on, he can be a first call out guy.
Any dark horse picks in there, David, as you're looking down the list?
Going off what the guys on the forum said, this Sasan guy, I think he's going to be a first call out guy. He can do very well. Now he's going to be standing next to guys like McCarver and Akeem Williams, who have huge quads. I think if Eddie's really on the money, I think he can do really well. And then Rafael Jaramillo. He's a guy where I saw him at Tampa a few years ago when he made his pro debut. He looked really, really good. Legs need to come up some. So depending on where he's at, there's a couple of dark horses. It's hard to pick just one. Even Andrew Hudson. We saw him at the Arnold in South Africa. He looked good. Needed to tighten things up a little bit. But there's that's the cool thing about this list is it's a very dynamic list, I guess. You have your guys who, Dallas and and Fred Smalls and Brandon Curry, who we kind of know what to expect. And there's a handful of other guys where we're not sure what to expect, but if they bring something really good, it could throw this whole show into a tailspin, I guess.
Now, Brandon Curry is a name obviously we did mention, but he's always one of those guys that seems to get lost in the lineup when you're talking about the favorites and who might be Brandon Curry's won some shows. I mean, Brandon Curry has been to the Olympia. Yeah, eighth in top 10 in the Olympia. You can't discount that. Obviously, the Achilles heel to Brandon, as we all know, is conditioning. Stupendous upper body. Of course, the legs have always needed to come up a little bit. But if he's managed to bring those up a little bit, if he can nail that conditioning, this is a show he can win very easily.
Yeah, he can win. Well, he could win almost every show he's in, not called the Arnold and the Olympia,
right,
if he comes in really good shape. But that's the big if. And he's worked with a couple different coaches, and we've talked to him on a handful of occasions. He's trying something different. Maybe he just needs to go old school and suffer and bring grainy conditioning. And like you said, here's a guy who's placed as high as eighth at the Olympia. Now you look at the Olympia lineup from last couple of years and this year, and it's easy to forget that Brandon is that good because we're so used to seeing him out of shape. But man, if he nails it, he could be winning all these shows.
Well, not to be denied, the men's classic physique also taking the stage, and we've got some perennials in there, of course, most notably Darren Charles. Now, Darren told me at the beginning of the year he was planning on doing every single men's classic physique show that we had on the schedule, and he's been true to it. He's obviously won his fair share already. He's qualified 10 times over, but he continues to bring it, and he's going to be in shape. Can anybody beat Darren Charles in this lineup?
The best guy who's got a shot at beating Darren, in my opinion, would be Coach Ndeka, and Darren beat Cole last week. So, I don't know that much is going to change. Darren's one of these guys where his consistency is always there. So it's not like, well, Darren's going to be off this week. He's not going to be off. So all things being equal, unless Cole is that much sharper, I don't see Darren losing here. This AJ Shakuri from Canada, AJ I've been super impressed with. I was really impressed with him as a men's physique competitor, and I always wanted to see him do better in men's physique. He was a little bit bigger than some of the other guys, and I think that hurt him. So classic physique is a good fit for him. He's similar to Arash Rabar in physique, and we saw AJ at third in New York. I think he got runner up in Toronto. So he's another one of these guys look to be at the top, and if AJ can get just a little bit bigger, he's got an amazing structure. He could do really well. So an AJ with maybe 10 pounds, I think come back next year, I think he's one of these guys that can beat somebody like Darren.
All right. Well, we got men's physique also in the lineup. And that's pretty much just wide open. There's not a lot of superstars. It's not to take away from anybody in the list, but like you said, David, sometimes that makes for very good competition because it is wide open. There's not any big names that are, sticking out at you, but it makes for good competition. And let's face it, somebody's going to get that Olympia qualifying spot.
Yeah, every single guy that's competing here, whether it's their first show, whether they've been around the scene for a while, the goal is to get to the Olympia. And, and some of these guys, John Nguyen, I think John has been there. But, some of these guys are dead set on it. A handful of them have some points already. But, you get the win, you get the automatic ticket. You don't have to compete the rest of the year, although a lot of these guys do. So, it's a good opportunity for somebody to walk away with, like you said, a win in Olympia for qualification, a check in their pocket. And right now, looking at this list, it looks pretty open.
And this is kind of a pivotal time right now because we are literally 12 weeks out from the Olympia. So this is kind of the do or die time in terms of, okay, you can qualify now. You got a little bit of time that you can kind of get off the diet and and then boom, you're on into the Olympia. So anything past this now, you're really almost going to just ride it into the Olympia. So this is pivotal in terms of time frame. Most guys are getting ready 12 weeks out of the Olympia. The Phils and the top guys, Dexter and those guys, are all shutting it down right now in terms of appearances, in terms of travel, and they're going to obviously focus on the Olympia. Speaking of which, David, I'd be remiss once again
Which way are we going with this?
if I didn't mention that the Kai Green interview that we did on the TLR just the other day. Obviously, we came out on MD, and it's getting a lot of good feedback. What did you think? I'm sure you got a chance to watch it by now, David.
I thought you did a good job getting him to answer questions. That was,
Do my best, yeah.
Yeah, Kai's going to be Kai, and he's an interesting.
Now, what did you think out of his answers out of that? Now, obviously, he was a little coy in terms of so many answers, but he was upfront and truthful with others. We know for a fact he will not be on the Olympia stage this year. It doesn't seem to bother him in the least. It doesn't seem like Kai, and at least in his mind, he needs the Olympia to define him or his career. I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic in that, I don't know, on one hand, I think you almost owe it to your fans and your base to do the Olympia and to the sport itself. On the other hand, listen, he's an individual. It's his choice. And he said it was his choice. I mean, he just doesn't want to go in the Olympia.
Yeah, no, Kai's he's in an interesting spot. I mean, if we're talking from a career standpoint and just personal achievement, everybody wants to be on the Olympia stage. Now, if he feels for some reason that he's never actually going to win, regardless of how he shows up, although last year Phil was as off as Phil's ever been, so it might have been the year he should have showed up. If that's what he really feels and he doesn't feel like he's going to get the win and the second place isn't worth his time, then he can do that. Kai right now, from a financial standpoint for what second place gets at the Olympia, Kai is in such high demand, especially overseas, that I don't think the money from the Olympia is really an issue for him.
I don't think it's a money thing either. I definitely don't think it's a monetary thing. I mean, listen, he makes plenty of money. He's been doing well. He's got his new supplement company, which he mentioned, in there with the Dynamic Muscle, and then I'm sure they're going to do very well with that. But I can't help but think, David, when you say like, well, if he doesn't think he's going to win, listen, if Jay Cutler had that attitude years ago, he never would have became a four-time Mr. Olympia. Let's face it, he had his fair share of losses against Ronnie Coleman, great as Ronnie was. But, I mean, if he had that attitude and says, well, you know what, I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to do Arnold Classics and I'm never going to win this thing anyways. Well, obviously he did end up winning 4 times over. If Dexter Jackson had that attitude, he never wins the Olympia in 2008. And there's countless examples of this throughout the years. But I can't help but think that, at that level, when you're a Kai Green, you have that kind of physique, probably the only physique currently that most people would think, if anybody's going to beat Phil, that's the guy that can do it. If he just nails it on game day, and Phil has been off in the last couple of Olympias, he could win it. To me, it's a little self-defeating, don't you think?
I think from a competitor standpoint, it doesn't matter whether you're talking bodybuilding, or any sport, football, it doesn't matter. I think there's always that what if I don't compete, what could have been, and I think if Kai sits out another year and Phil shows up off, I think you're going to be living with that, that what if. Even Jay Cutler, you bring up a good point with Jay. The one Olympia Jay did sit out in 2002 was arguably Ronnie's worst showing as far as the years that he won, not later on in 2005 or prior to winning the Olympia, but as far as the Olympias that Ronnie won, 2002 arguably his worst year, and the one that Jay set out. And even now, even though Jay has 4 titles, he's like, maybe I could have had 5, and had he won in 2002, does that put him in a better spot to maybe win in 2003 and end Ronnie's reign a little bit earlier? So again, Kai's got to make up his own decisions, and if he's comfortable with that, then good for him. But I can't help but think that any athlete, you're always going to have that what if. Now, if Phil comes out and it's the lights out Phil that everybody wants to see, then maybe Kai's sitting back and saying, okay, I made the right decision, but if Phil's off and and it looks like there was an opening for somebody to sneak in and win, or what if Phil doesn't win? What if Phil's off and Dexter or Sean Roden?
Dexter's the happiest, as I mentioned to Kai. Dexter's the happiest guy. He's sending Kai thank you letters, and gift baskets to his house, saying, no, stay home, man. It's cool. I got it. This is cool. But listen, we've got a great Olympia coming up. You got Big Ramy in the mix. You got Dennis Wolf. I don't think will be in the Olympia. I talked to Dennis when we were at the DJ show down in Phoenix, and he's got a little bit of a road ahead of him. He had some nerve problems, as most people know by now. They put some plates and some screws up in there and got him back together, but that's going to take a little time, I think, to generate. I don't think we're going to see him on the stage this year, but that does open up that top 6, possibly for somebody new. Sean Roden, he just started shutting it down. You can see he's starting to get in some shape now for the O. And, of course, Kevin Levrone. The big comeback. I did ask Kai about that, of course, and he was excited. You can see Kai is still a fan of bodybuilding. You can see him kind of light up a little bit talking about Kevin and that he's good for the sport and all that. But let's talk realistics here. we've heard anything from. Listen, I love seeing a picture posted from 1995 about and putting it next to Phil and saying do they compare. Is that even remotely fair? I mean, you're talking about 20 years difference. You're talking about 13 years off the stage. You're talking about a guy who's 51 years old. And listen, as I've said, and I will stick by this, if anybody could do it, it's Kevin Levrone. I've seen this guy. I know him very well. He's a good friend of mine. I've never seen a guy respond like he does to getting in shape. In a short period of time, I've seen this guy go from nothing to second place in the Olympia to Ronnie Coleman in 12 weeks' time. But can you do it at 51 years old?
Boy, I sure hope so. I overanalyze everything.
No, you?
Right. And so, the question I ask myself, let's take Dexter, for example. Here's the question. Let's say Dexter stopped competing 3 or 4 years ago and then just took off of lifting and everything until he was 50.
Right.
I mean, he's 46 right now and still kicking butt. So I think Dexter, realistically, I think if Dexter stopped training right now and took 3-4 years off, I think Dexter could probably come back at 50 and probably still do very well, whether his legs would be as big or whatever. But, if he took that time off, and that's one thing that I really try to take into consideration with Kevin is, yes, he's 51. He's the youngest looking, probably 51-year-old you've ever seen. And so that's the question to me is, does all this time that he's had off, is he going to have a fresh look? Is his body going to look like it was aging? Are the legs going to be down? Somebody posted a picture of Vince Taylor competing at 51. Waist is a little bit wider. The same thing we see with a lot of the older guys. Even Dexter's legs are down maybe a little bit. We saw Tony Freeman's legs go down a little bit. Vince Taylor, later on in his career, his legs go down a little bit. That's the big question mark with Kevin. I think as long, we know he's going to be big. I think as long as Kevin nails his conditioning and he's razor sharp, I think regardless of, how big his legs are relative to where he was at, when he was competing younger, I think it's a win for Kevin. I think it's a win for bodybuilding. I think
the fans win in this one. I mean, let's face it. You may never ever see this type of an event again. Few people can actually do it. Number one, few people are capable of doing it. But even more so, you're talking about a guy again, 13 years removed from his last Olympia, coming back here to basically prove a point. And again, he wasn't, talking mad stuff out there about, I'm going to beat Phil, this and that. He says, look, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to train to. Not in public, yeah. But that's, hey, listen. Hey, listen, I like that attitude, though. And he should be going in with that attitude. If you're going in to do well, or if you're going in there just be happy to be there, that's not Kevin Levrone. And anybody that knows him knows that's not the case. Speaking of which, just this past week, you saw a poster come out on the Olympia. It's got 2 people on there. It's got Kevin, and it's got Phil Heath. Now, the battle of the eras. Pick a title. And some of the internet goes wild. And I get a kick out of this stuff. It's like, I don't think that's fair to Dexter. I don't think it's fair to this guy. I don't think it's fair to the other guys. Look, there's 100 posters that come out for the Olympia every year. They change it up all the time. It's in order to generate interest. And listen, they put all kinds of matchups out there. Sometimes it's the top 6 guys. Sometimes you got a couple new guys on there. I think this was a great poster. I like it. I think if Kevin's going to go in the Olympia, I think you kind of need to use that. Listen, we're trying to sell tickets, folks, okay? It's the Olympia. It's the greatest bodybuilding show on earth. I think it's a great storyline. I think it's great for the fans. I can't wait to get Kevin in the press conference. And I hope they put him front and center, of course, which I think they certainly would. I think he's earned that over the years. The other question that's come up quite a few times, which I've answered, but for those who didn't see it, no, Kevin Levrone did not have to requalify for the Olympia. I think that would have been a slap in the face to a man of his caliber. Yeah. You do have to submit for a special invitation. And they haven't given out one in years. The last one I can remember was Gunther Schlierkamp or Fedorov, and that was years ago. Believe me, they do not give these things out very easily. But there are a few guys, I can count them on one hand, that if they wanted to come back, that they are worthy of, without any question in the mind. You do not let a guy like a Kevin Levrone have to requalify. Like I said, I think there's a respect level there. If Sean Ray wanted to come back, if Flex Wheeler wanted, hey, you're here right here, sugar. Come on, man. If Flex Wheeler wanted to come back, you got a guy of that caliber. I don't think you make them requalify. I think you absolutely give them an invite. I think they've earned that over these years, and I think it's certainly well justified.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's a couple of guys, I'm not going to throw names out there, but there have been a handful of pros that I've talked to that have been like, well, he should have to qualify like everybody else. And it's just like, All right, pump the brakes here for a second, guy. You're talking about Kevin Levrone, and one of the best bodybuilders of all time. If you try arguing against that, he's in the top 10, top 5, then you haven't been following bodybuilding too much. But I think it was a good move. It allows obviously for there to be some hype built up, which is it's a good move. I mean, look, the Olympia is an awesome show, but there's still business and there's a promotional standpoint, and I think part of the anticipation for the Olympia is the fact that we haven't seen Kevin out there before. There's question marks about how he's going to look, and let's say, and I'm very confident in Kevin. I've talked to him, off camera. He's like got the killer instinct. He's like you said, he might be humble in some of his interviews. He's in his head, he's competing to win. But he doesn't know any other way, and so that's what he's doing. But if we see him at a show 4 or 6 weeks out and he's a little off or he's not quite ready, that just deflates things completely going into the Olympia. And so I think it's a good move for the fans, for the Olympia, for the sport of bodybuilding, to give him that qualification, to build up that hype, that anticipation. And obviously you're going to be on stage, I'm going to be in the crowd, and the minute he walks out on stage, that's going to be a huge moment in bodybuilding.
Well, we mentioned our good buddy Sean Ray. He will be on the next edition of The Last Rep because there's a whole bunch of things we want to be able to cover. One, he wants to talk about Kevin Levrone a little bit in his comments, and those two have been good friends for years, but he made some comments before that Kevin didn't take too kindly to. So he wants to talk about that. Also, he was originally slated to be on the interview with me and Kai Green, but the Kai camp insisted that basically Sean wasn't on the interview, so he's got we've got he's got some interesting comments on that as well. So this is going to be a good. If you thought the Kai interview was good, wait till the Sugar Sean interview coming up this next week, because we got a whole bunch of things to cover. Speaking of coverage, David, we've got a full weekend here tomorrow morning. The pros take the stage 10 a.m. here in Chicago. So we will have, of course, our post prejudging report. We'll see if we got anywhere close to any of our predictions. And Saturday, of course, we got a full day as well with the competition being spread out over 2 days.
Men's open bikini and women's bodybuilding are Saturday. Everything else is tomorrow. So 212, men's physique, classic physique, figure, women's physique. All in fitness, all go tomorrow. So these athletes only have to do hair, makeup, tanning for 1 day. So it's going to be 10 o'clock and 4 o'clock respectively, both days, prejudging and finals. So we got a big weekend ahead.
And the NPC amateurs, of course, taking the stage as well Saturday morning. He's got a big lineup for that as well. So full coverage. Stay tuned right here at MD. Of course, we'll be back all throughout the weekend with full coverage. For David Bay, this is Bob Chick. We're out.